A simple woman kicked out of first class. They had no idea her billionaire husband owned the airline. Clara was not the kind of woman people usually noticed. She was simple, quiet, and always dressed plainly. She never tried to show off or draw attention to herself. Her days were mostly spent taking care of her family and doing small things that made life easier for those around her. She didn't own fancy clothes or expensive jewelry, and she never talked about money or status. For Clara, life was about kindness, honesty, and helping others whenever she could. On this particular day, Clara was traveling alone. She was going to visit her sister in another city. It was a trip she had made many times before, but this time she had decided to fly instead of taking the train. It was faster, and she wanted to get there quickly. She packed a small bag with just what she needed: a few clothes, some books, and a photo of her family. When Clara arrived at the airport, she felt a little nervous. Airports were busy and noisy, filled with people rushing everywhere. But she stayed calm and focused. She followed the signs to the check-in counter, where a friendly agent helped her with her ticket. Clara had never flown first class before, and she certainly hadn't booked a first-class ticket herself. Somehow, when she received her boarding pass, it showed that she was assigned a seat in the first-class cabin. At first, Clara didn't think much about it. She thought maybe there had been a mistake, but she didn't want to cause any trouble. She smiled politely and thanked the agent. After all, sitting in first class would make her flight more comfortable, wouldn't it? Maybe it was a kind surprise. As she walked toward the gate, Clara noticed people looking at her curiously. Some whispered quietly to each other. She wondered why. She was just a simple woman, not dressed in fancy clothes or wearing makeup. She looked more like someone who would be traveling in economy class, not in the luxurious first-class cabin. But Clara didn't pay much attention. She kept her head down and moved steadily forward. When it was time to board, Clara showed her boarding pass to the flight attendant. The attendant looked at her pass and then at Clara herself. For a moment, the attendant seemed surprised. Clara smiled softly and walked into the first-class area. The seats were wide and comfortable, and the cabin was quiet and peaceful. It smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and there were small tables with magazines and snacks. Clara found her seat and sat down. She looked out the window and took a deep breath. This was her first time in such a fancy place on a plane, and she felt a little out of place. But she told herself it was okay to enjoy a little kindness, even if it seemed strange. The flight began, and Clara watched the city below as the plane took off smoothly into the sky. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her family: her husband, Jonathan, and their 2 children. Jonathan was a quiet man who rarely talked about his work. He was a billionaire, but he never acted like one. He didn't like to show off or spend money on luxury. Instead, he cared about helping people and making the world a better place. Clara thought about how different their lives were from most rich families. They didn't live in grand mansions or throw big parties. Their home was simple and full of love. Jonathan's business success was something Clara hardly talked about, even with close friends. She wanted people to know her for who she was, not because of her husband's money. As the plane flew higher, Clara noticed some of the other passengers in first class looking at her again. Some smiled kindly, while others whispered behind their hands. A flight attendant came by with a tray of drinks, and Clara asked for a glass of water. The attendant smiled warmly and offered a small snack. Everything seemed peaceful, but Clara could feel a quiet tension in the air. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because she didn't look like a typical first-class passenger. Or maybe it was because people were unsure about her. Clara didn't mind. She had learned long ago that sometimes people judge others by how they look, and that wasn't always fair. After a while, a man in a crisp uniform approached her seat. He was one of the flight attendants, and he looked serious. He explained gently that there had been a mistake with her ticket, and that the first-class seats were all reserved for other passengers. He politely asked Clara to move to economy class, where she would find her correct seat. Clara felt a wave of embarrassment and sadness. She nodded quietly and thanked the attendant. She stood up slowly, gathering her things. As she walked toward the back of the plane, some passengers watched her with sympathy. Others seemed curious. Clara wished she could explain that she didn't mean to cause any trouble. She settled into her economy seat, which was much smaller and less comfortable than the one she had left. The lights of the city below twinkled through the window as the plane continued its journey. Clara looked around at the faces of the other passengers. Some smiled at her kindly, others seemed lost in their own thoughts. Despite the change in seats, Clara kept her calm. She reminded herself that it didn't matter where she sat. What mattered was the journey, the people she loved, and the simple things that made life meaningful. As the flight moved forward, Clara's thoughts returned to her husband, Jonathan. She remembered the quiet evenings they spent together, the small dinners they shared, and the laughter of their children playing in the garden. Jonathan was a man of great success, but he never let it change who he was. Clara hoped that one day, people would see that true wealth wasn't about seats on a plane or fancy clothes. It was about kindness, humility, and the love we share with others. And for Clara, that was the most important lesson of all. After Clara moved to the economy section, the atmosphere on the plane felt very different. The seats were smaller and closer together, and the noise was louder. People were talking, children were playing, and flight attendants were moving quickly up and down the aisle. Clara took a deep breath and tried to settle in. She reminded herself that this was just a temporary change. She didn't want to make a fuss or draw any more attention to herself. But even as she sat quietly, Clara noticed that some passengers were still looking at her. She could feel their curious eyes, and some whispered quietly to each other. She didn't understand why. She had done nothing wrong. She had only followed the instructions of the flight attendant and moved to her assigned seat. Still, the feeling of being watched made her uncomfortable. Clara looked out the window, trying to focus on the clouds and the bright blue sky beyond. She thought about how sometimes life seemed unfair. One moment, everything felt smooth and easy, and the next, things changed without warning. She had experienced many changes in her life before, but this one felt strange because it was happening in front of so many strangers. As the plane flew on, Clara's mind wandered back to her husband Jonathan. He was a private man, the kind who didn't like attention or praise. Despite being a billionaire, he never acted rich or important. Instead, he spent most of his time working quietly behind the scenes to help others. Clara often admired his humility and kindness. She wondered what he would think about the situation on the plane. Just then, a young woman sitting nearby leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay?" Clara looked up and smiled gently. "Yes, thank you," she said softly. The woman nodded and returned to her seat. It was a small moment of kindness, but it helped Clara feel a little less alone. As the flight continued, Clara noticed that the flight attendants seemed a bit tense. They moved quickly and spoke quietly to each other. She wondered if the problem with her seat had caused more trouble than she realized. But Clara didn't want to get involved. She just wanted to reach her destination and see her sister. Suddenly, one of the flight attendants approached Clara again. This time, her tone was softer, but there was a clear sense of urgency in her eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly, "there has been some confusion with your ticket. Could you please wait here for a moment? We need to sort things out." Clara nodded and stayed in her seat. Her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she hoped it would be resolved quickly. She looked around and saw the other passengers watching. The quiet murmurs grew louder, and some people pulled out their phones as if they wanted to record what was going on. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later with a man in a uniform. He was the head flight attendant, and his expression was serious. He spoke calmly but firmly. "Ma'am, we understand there has been a mistake with your ticket. We are very sorry for the inconvenience. We will do our best to make this right." Clara appreciated the apology, but she still felt uneasy. She didn't want any special treatment or attention. She just wanted to be treated fairly and with respect. She nodded and said quietly, "Thank you. I understand." As the plane flew steadily through the sky, Clara thought about the many times she had faced challenges in her life. She remembered how her parents had taught her to be patient and kind, even when things didn't go her way. She knew that sometimes, the best way to handle difficult situations was to stay calm and be polite. While Clara sat quietly, the head flight attendant made a phone call. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the woman's voice was serious, and she nodded several times. After she hung up, she told Clara, "We are checking with the airline's main office to clarify the situation. Please be patient." Clara waited. Minutes passed slowly, but she tried to keep her thoughts positive. She reminded herself that every problem had a solution, even if it wasn't clear right away. The other passengers whispered among themselves, and some glanced over at Clara with mixed expressions. Some were curious, some were surprised, and a few seemed doubtful. Despite the tension, Clara noticed something else. A few passengers smiled kindly at her, as if offering silent support. She felt a small warmth in her heart. Even in the most uncomfortable moments, kindness could still be found. Then, a new voice came over the plane's intercom. It was the captain speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in service. We are currently resolving a seating issue and appreciate your patience." Clara listened carefully. She could tell the captain's voice was calm but serious. It made her wonder how many people were involved in trying to fix the problem. She felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. After a while, the head flight attendant returned with a tablet in her hand. She smiled gently at Clara and said, "Ma'am, we have received new instructions from the airline. Please follow me." Clara stood up and followed the flight attendant back toward the first-class cabin. She felt nervous but curious. What could be happening now? As they entered the first-class section, Clara saw some of the other passengers looking at her again. This time, their expressions were different, less judgmental, more surprised. The flight attendant led Clara to a seat and said quietly, "Please wait here for a moment." Clara sat down and looked around. The first-class cabin was still peaceful and bright. She felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. She didn't understand why the situation had changed again. Suddenly, the door to the cockpit opened, and a man in a pilot's uniform came out. His face was kind but serious. He walked over to Clara and said, "Ma'am, I'm Captain Richards. I want to personally apologize for the confusion earlier." Clara looked up, surprised. "Thank you, Captain," she replied softly. The captain smiled and said, "We just received information that your husband is the owner of this airline. We had no idea until now. I want you to know that we respect you greatly, and I apologize for the mistake." Clara's eyes widened. She had not expected the pilot to know about her husband, especially not on this flight. She felt a rush of emotions: surprise, relief, and a little embarrassment. The captain continued, "Please, let me know if there is anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable." Clara nodded, still trying to take it all in. She said, "Thank you. I just want a quiet flight." The captain smiled and nodded. "You will have it." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Clara sat back in her seat. She thought about how strange life could be. Here she was, a simple woman who didn't want attention, suddenly at the center of a story on a plane full of strangers. But Clara knew one thing for sure: no matter what others thought, she was proud of the life she and Jonathan had built together. It wasn't about wealth or luxury, it was about love, respect, and kindness. And that was something no mistake or misunderstanding could ever change. After the captain's surprising announcement, the atmosphere on the plane began to change. Clara, who had always preferred to stay in the background, suddenly found herself the center of attention. Yet, she stayed calm and humble, just like she always did. She wasn't used to people knowing about her husband's success, and she certainly didn't expect it to come up on a flight. The flight attendants moved with a new sense of respect when they passed by Clara's seat. They offered her drinks and snacks with extra kindness, but Clara refused most of them politely. She didn't want to make a big deal out of the situation. All she wanted was to have a quiet flight and get to her sister's house safely. Some passengers looked at her with surprise, some with admiration, and others with curiosity. There was a soft buzz of conversations around her, but Clara tried not to pay too much attention. She knew that in moments like these, people often forget that she was just a simple woman, not someone who wanted to be famous or noticed. As the plane flew on, a flight attendant came over and gently asked if Clara would be willing to share a little about herself. "Some passengers are curious," she said kindly. Clara thought for a moment but then agreed. She believed it was better to be honest and open. She smiled softly and said, "I am just a regular person. I take care of my family, and I try to be kind to others. My husband works hard, and he has done well, but that doesn't change who we are inside." Her words seemed to touch the people around her. Many nodded and smiled. It was clear that Clara's honesty and simplicity made her different from what people had expected. While the plane flew over mountains and rivers, Clara thought about how different her life was from most people's ideas about wealth and success. Jonathan, her husband, was not the kind of billionaire who showed off expensive cars or lived in huge mansions. Instead, he was quiet and thoughtful. He spent much of his time helping others and supporting causes that mattered to him. Clara remembered a recent trip when Jonathan had visited a small village far from the city. Instead of enjoying luxury, he had spent time talking to villagers, listening to their problems, and offering help. He never wanted the attention or praise, he just wanted to make a difference. As she thought about Jonathan, Clara smiled quietly. She felt proud of him, but she also felt lucky to be loved by someone so kind and humble. Their life together was simple, but it was full of meaning. Suddenly, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for your patience during this unusual situation. We have corrected the seating arrangements, and the rest of the flight will continue smoothly. We appreciate your understanding." The passengers clapped softly, some with smiles on their faces. Clara noticed that the mood on the plane had changed. People were more relaxed and friendly now. As the flight went on, a few passengers came over to talk to Clara. Some wanted to hear more about her life, while others simply wanted to offer kind words. Clara answered their questions honestly, always keeping her humble tone. She talked about her children, her home, and the simple joys of everyday life. One elderly woman smiled warmly and said, "It's nice to meet someone so real. In a world full of show and noise, you are a breath of fresh air." Clara felt her heart lift. She realized that even though she was caught in an unexpected story, her true self was shining through. It was not her husband's money or power that mattered most, but the kindness and honesty she shared with others. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain and his co-pilot discussed the situation quietly. The captain was impressed by Clara's calm and grace. He told his crew that it was a good reminder that behind every name and ticket number, there was a real person with a story. Back in first class, Clara noticed that the flight attendants had prepared a small surprise for her. They brought a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten note from the airline CEO, thanking her for her patience and understanding. Clara accepted the gift with a gentle smile but told them it was unnecessary. She didn't want special treatment. Still, she appreciated the gesture. As the plane continued its journey, Clara looked out the window once more. The clouds moved slowly below, soft and white like cotton. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm orange and pink colors. It was a beautiful sight, and for a moment, Clara felt peaceful. She thought about how life was full of unexpected moments, some difficult, some wonderful. This trip had been both, but Clara knew that it was these moments that made life rich and meaningful. At that moment, Jonathan's words came back to her. He often said that true success was not about money or status, but about the people you touch and the love you give. Clara believed those words deeply. She smiled to herself, knowing that no matter what happened next, she would continue living her simple life with honesty, kindness, and love. That was what truly mattered. As the plane began its final descent toward Clara's destination, she felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, with grace and humility. And above all, ready to be herself. The plane touched down gently, and the wheels rolled along the runway with a soft rumble. Clara felt a mixture of relief and tiredness. The hours in the sky, the unexpected attention, and the shifting seats had made her trip more complicated than she had imagined. Yet, through it all, she had stayed calm and true to herself. As the passengers began to gather their belongings and prepare to leave, whispers and quiet conversations filled the cabin. Many people glanced at Clara with new understanding and respect. It was clear that the story about her husband owning the airline had spread quickly. But Clara didn't mind. She never wanted to hide the truth, she just wanted to live simply without fuss. When she stepped off the plane, the airport staff greeted her warmly. A few of them smiled and thanked her for her patience during the flight. Clara nodded politely, still feeling a bit overwhelmed by the day's events. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, and the air was fresh. It felt good to be on solid ground again. As she made her way through the airport, Clara's phone buzzed. It was a message from her husband, Jonathan. It read, "I heard about what happened on the plane. I'm proud of you, as always. See you soon." Clara smiled, feeling a wave of love and comfort wash over her. Jonathan's quiet support meant more to her than any public attention. At the baggage claim, Clara waited patiently. She thought about how life could be unpredictable. One moment, she was just a simple woman boarding a plane, and the next, she was the center of a story that everyone talked about. She realized how quickly people could jump to conclusions or make assumptions without knowing the full story. Later, when she finally reached her sister's house, Clara was greeted with warm hugs and happy faces. Her sister, Mary, had heard about the flight situation and was eager to hear Clara's side of the story. They sat together in the cozy living room, drinking tea and sharing laughs. Clara told Mary everything: how she had been moved from first class to economy, the confusion among the flight attendants, and finally, the surprising moment when the captain revealed her husband's connection to the airline. Mary listened closely, her eyes wide with surprise. "You handled it so well," Mary said. "I would have been so embarrassed or angry." Clara shook her head gently. "It wasn't easy, but I remembered that being kind and patient is always better than getting upset. People have their own problems, and I didn't want to add to anyone's stress." Over the next few days, Clara noticed something interesting. Despite the attention from the flight, her life continued much as usual. She didn't receive special treatment from strangers, nor did she change how she lived. She still helped with the housework, cooked meals, and spent time with her family. But something had shifted inside her. Clara felt stronger and more confident. She realized that being true to herself was more important than trying to meet other people's expectations. Her simple life was her choice, and it was enough. Meanwhile, news of the incident on the plane began to spread. Stories appeared in newspapers and online, sharing the surprising tale of a humble woman mistaken for someone else, only to reveal her husband's secret connection to the airline. Many people were fascinated by the story. Some articles praised Clara for her grace and humility. They talked about how she handled the situation with kindness and without complaint. Others discussed how appearances can be deceiving, that someone who looks simple might have a remarkable story behind them. Clara didn't pay much attention to the headlines. She preferred to focus on her family and the quiet joys of life. But she did receive messages from friends and acquaintances, congratulating her and expressing admiration. One day, a reporter contacted Clara, asking if she would agree to an interview. Clara thought carefully before answering. She didn't want to become a public figure or make a big show of her life. But she also saw an opportunity to share an important message. In the interview, Clara spoke openly and honestly. She explained that her husband's success did not change who they were as people. She talked about the value of kindness, humility, and treating others with respect regardless of their background or wealth. Her words resonated with many listeners. People appreciated her sincerity and the way she reminded them that true worth comes from character, not money or status. As the days passed, Clara continued her daily routine. She found comfort in the simple moments: morning walks, cooking dinner, reading with her children. These were the things that mattered most to her. One afternoon, Jonathan surprised Clara by coming to visit her sister's home. They shared a quiet dinner together, talking about everything that had happened. Jonathan admired Clara's strength and grace. He told her how proud he was to have her by his side. Clara smiled and said, "I couldn't do it without you. But remember, we are just ordinary people who try to live well and love deeply." Jonathan nodded. "That's what makes us extraordinary." Their conversation reminded Clara that no matter what others thought, their life was built on a foundation of love and respect. That was the real story, the one that mattered most. Over time, the story of Clara and the flight became a lesson for many. It showed that wealth and power don't define a person. It showed that kindness and humility shine brighter than any luxury seat. And for Clara, it was a reminder that staying true to herself was the greatest strength she had. After the days passed and the story about Clara's flight settled down, life slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Clara was back home with her husband Jonathan and their 2 children, surrounded by the quiet comfort of family and routine. Despite the unusual attention she had received, she remained the same gentle and humble woman she had always been. Clara's children were excited to have their mother back. They missed her laughter and stories, and they wanted to hear every detail about her trip. Clara smiled as she told them the story in a way they could understand: how sometimes things don't go as planned, but kindness and patience help us through. Jonathan watched Clara with pride. He knew that his wife's strength was not just about handling a difficult situation, but about living with grace every single day. For Jonathan, Clara was more than just his wife. She was the heart of their family and the soul of their simple life. Even though Clara and Jonathan had plenty of money, they chose to live simply. Their house was cozy, with plain furniture and warm colors. They didn't have expensive cars or a large staff to take care of everything. Instead, they shared the work and helped each other. Clara believed that hard work and love were the real treasures. One afternoon, Clara and Jonathan sat together on their porch, watching their children play in the garden. The sun was warm, and the birds sang softly. Clara felt happy and calm. She thought about the flight once again and the lessons she had learned. She realized that people often judge others by what they see on the surface: the clothes they wear, the places they sit, or the company they keep. But those things don't tell the true story of a person's heart. Clara wanted to remind people that kindness, respect, and humility were the qualities that truly mattered. Jonathan took her hand and said, "You have taught me so much, Clara. Your quiet strength is a gift to everyone around you." Clara smiled and squeezed his hand gently. We all have the power to be kind, no matter where we are or who we are with. That is what changes the world. Their simple words carried a deep truth. It was not money or power that shaped a life, but the small, everyday choices to be good and caring. As weeks turned into months, Clara's story became an inspiration for many. She was invited to speak at schools and community events, where she shared her message of kindness and humility. People listened to her with respect and admiration, not because she was wealthy, but because she was real. Clara never sought the spotlight. She wore simple clothes and spoke in a gentle voice. But her message was powerful. She reminded people that everyone deserved respect, no matter where they came from or how much money they had. At one of her talks, a young woman came up to Clara and said, "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to be myself. I was afraid that I had to change to fit in, but you helped me see that being kind is what truly matters." Clara smiled warmly and said, "You are enough just as you are. The world needs your kindness." Back at home, Clara continued to find joy in the little things. She cooked meals for her family, helped her children with their homework, and took long walks in the nearby park. She loved watching the seasons change and feeling the fresh air on her face. Jonathan continued to run his business with care and thoughtfulness. He respected his employees and worked to make the airline a company that treated people well. Clara was proud of the man he was, and she supported him quietly in the background. One day, Jonathan surprised Clara with a small gift, a book filled with letters from people who had been inspired by her story. Clara read the letters carefully, feeling grateful for the kindness she had received. One letter said, "Your story reminded me to be patient and gentle with others. Thank you for showing us that true strength comes from the heart." Another letter said, "I used to think success meant having money, but you helped me understand that success is about love and respect." Clara kept the book close, a reminder that even small acts of kindness could make a big difference. As the years went by, Clara's story remained a quiet legend among those who knew her. She never forgot the flight or the way people had judged her by her appearance. But she also never let it change who she was. Instead, Clara continued to live her life with kindness and humility, showing everyone around her that true wealth is found in the heart. And in the end, that simple woman who was once kicked out of first class became a symbol of something much greater, a reminder that no matter where we come from or what others think, our true value lies in how we treat each other.